the rifle barrel pressed cold against her temple. Evelyn Hart's hands trembled as the enforcer's finger moved toward the trigger. Behind her, Rowan Mercer, the mountain man she'd married 3 months ago to escape one nightmare, stood frozen, his own blood spreading across the cabin floor. "You actually thought you could run from him?" the enforcer whispered. Outside, the worst blizzard in 20 years buried the mountain in white. No law, no witnesses, no escape. This was how her desperate gamble would end, not in Philadelphia society where she'd been destroyed, but in a stranger's cabin at the edge of nowhere. But before you find out if she survives, let me take you back to where this all started. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The advertisement in the Philadelphia Gazette was brutally honest. Wanted, woman for marriage, must be strong, healthy, and willing to work. Mountain territory, isolated location, harsh conditions, no romance promised. Contact R. Mercer, Black Ridge, Colorado Territory. Evelyn Hart read it 17 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to write a response. She sat in a boarding house room that smelled of mildew and broken dreams, her last $4 folded beneath the inkwell. Outside, rain hammered the cobblestones where, just 6 weeks earlier, she'd walked freely through Philadelphia's best neighborhoods, wearing silk dresses and attending garden parties where women whispered behind painted fans. That world was gone now. Thomas Whitmore had made sure of it, her pen scratched across cheap paper. "I accept your terms. I can arrive within 3 weeks." She didn't mention that she was fleeing, that her reputation had been systematically destroyed, that the alternative to Colorado was considerably worse than isolation and harsh conditions. She signed her name and mailed the letter before fear could stop her. 2 weeks later, she stood on a train platform with a single trunk containing everything she still owned. A woman in an expensive coat deliberately turned away when Evelyn tried to catch her eye, someone she'd once called a friend. 3 men loitering near the ticket office watched her with expressions that made her skin crawl. One of them worked for Thomas Whitmore. She was certain of it. The train couldn't leave fast enough. The journey west took 9 days that felt like 9 years. Evelyn watched civilization thin and eventually disappear through the smudged window of a third-class car. Philadelphia's brick buildings gave way to farmland, then prairie, then something vast and empty that seemed to stretch forever under enormous skies. Other passengers chatted about prospects and opportunities, fresh starts and gold claims. Nobody spoke to her. Women traveling alone were always suspect, but Evelyn had learned to read the particular quality of suspicion that followed her now. Somehow, impossibly, the rumors had traveled ahead of her. In a train stop in Kansas, a clerk refused to sell her a meal. In Wyoming, a woman pulled her daughter away when Evelyn sat down on a public bench. Thomas Whitmore's reach was longer than she'd imagined. She ate the stale bread she'd packed and tried not to think about what awaited her at the end of this journey. A mountain man who needed a wife badly enough to advertise for one probably wasn't the answer to anyone's prayers. But desperate women didn't get to be choosy, and Evelyn Hart had burned through her options faster than a match in a windstorm. On the 8th day, the train tracks ended. "Black Ridge is another 40 miles northwest," the station manager told her, barely glancing up. "Wagon runs twice a week when weather permits. Next one leaves tomorrow morning if you got fare." She had fare. Barely. That night, sleeping in the station house with her trunk as a pillow, Evelyn dreamed of Philadelphia society halls where everyone smiled while they destroyed you. She woke before dawn with her heart racing and Thomas Whitmore's voice echoing in her head. "You'll regret refusing me. I'll make certain of it." He'd kept that promise thoroughly. The wagon that arrived at sunrise looked like it had survived several wars and lost most of them. The driver, a weathered man named Calhoun who smelled like whiskey and tobacco, loaded her trunk with the enthusiasm of someone moving a corpse. "Heading to Black Ridge, are you?" He eyed her worn traveling dress and delicate hands. "What's a Philadelphia girl doing in country like this?" "Getting married?" Calhoun laughed, a sound like rocks in a tin bucket. "Rowan Mercer's bride, then. Heard he finally sent for one." He shook his head. "You know what you're getting into?" "I know enough." "I doubt that." But he helped her climb aboard anyway. 3 other passengers made the journey, a prospector with wild eyes who talked to himself, and 2 rough-looking men who might have been miners or bandits, or both. Nobody asked questions. In frontier country, people learn not to pry. The wagon lurched forward across terrain that grew progressively more hostile with each passing mile. Flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, then steep ridges covered in pine and aspen. The air turned thinner, colder. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter and tried to ignore the way the two rough men kept glancing at her trunk. Around noon, the driver pulled off the main trail. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked. "Shortcut, save us 3 hours." Something about his tone made her uneasy, but what could she do? Jump out and walk 40 miles through wilderness she didn't know? 20 minutes later, the wagon stopped completely. "Axle's busted," Calhoun announced. He didn't sound particularly surprised. While he and the prospector examined the damage, one of the rough men moved closer to Evelyn. He had a scar running from his eye to his jaw and teeth that had gone bad years ago. "That's a nice trunk," he said quietly. "But a Philadelphia girl's got nice things inside." "There's nothing valuable." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why don't we take a look?" His companion was already reaching for the latch. Evelyn stood up fast, ready to scream, ready to fight, ready to do whatever it took. "Touch that trunk and you'll lose the hand." The voice came from the tree line, flat and cold as winter stone. Everyone froze. A man emerged from the shadows of the pines, and Evelyn's first thought was that he looked exactly like what she'd expected, and nothing like it. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing buckskin and fur that made him seem almost part of the wilderness itself. A rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm, but there was nothing casual about the way he watched the two men near her trunk. This had to be Rowan Mercer. "We weren't doing nothing," the scarred man said, but his hand moved away from the trunk fast enough. "Calhoun." Rowan's eyes never left the two men. "Your axle's not broken. Bolt's just loose. Fix it and get moving." "Sure thing, Mercer." The driver suddenly discovered motivation he hadn't possessed 5 minutes earlier. Rowan moved closer to the wagon, and Evelyn got her first clear look at his face. Older than she'd expected, maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with the beard and the scars. One particularly vicious mark ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. His eyes were gray, cold as river stones, and they swept over her with the same thorough assessment he'd given the would-be thieves. "You're Evelyn Hart." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Got your letter. Didn't expect you for another week. The train schedule changed." He nodded once, then turned back to Calhoun. "How long?" 10 minutes to fix the bolt, hour to Black Ridge." "She rides with me." Rowan gestured toward a horse tied in the trees, a massive gray animal that looked mean enough to bite. "Her trunk goes on the wagon. Anyone touches it, I'll hear about it." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Nobody argued. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs. Up close, Rowan Mercer was even more intimidating. 6.5 feet of muscle and scar tissue, smelling like pine smoke and something wild. He handed her the horse's reins without ceremony. "You know how to ride?" "A little." "Good enough." He swung up into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd been doing it since childhood, then reached down and pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. "Hold on. Road's rough." Evelyn wrapped her arms around his waist because the alternative was falling off, and the horse lunged forward before she could second-guess the decision. Behind them, she heard Calhoun shouting orders and the wagon creaking back into motion. They rode in silence through pine forests and across ridges where the drop-offs made her stomach clench. Rowan guided the horse with minimal effort, navigating terrain that would have terrified her if she'd been alone. Gradually, Evelyn realized he'd timed their intercept perfectly. He must have been watching the road, waiting for the wagon, anticipating trouble. He'd come to protect her before they'd even met. After an hour of climbing, they crested a ridge and Rowan pulled the horse to a stop. There. Below them, a collection of rough buildings clustered in a valley between mountains. Black Ridge. It looked exactly like what it was. A hard frontier town clinging to existence at the edge of nowhere. Maybe 200 people, probably less in winter when the pass is closed. "It's not Philadelphia," Rowan said. "Good." He glanced back at her, surprise flickering across his face before the mask dropped back into place. "Cabin's another 3 miles, past the town, up the mountain. We can stop for supplies or ride straight through. Your choice." Evelyn thought about the stares she'd endured on the journey west, the whispers that had followed her across half a continent. Thought about Thomas Whitmore and his long reach, and the way rumors spread faster than fire. Straight through, she said. Rowan nodded once and urged the horse forward. They descended into Black Ridge just as afternoon sun slanted between the peaks. A few people stopped to stare as they passed, a giant of a man on a gray horse with a city woman holding onto his waist. The town had one main street, maybe 20 buildings total. A general store, a saloon, what might have been a church or a meeting hall, scattered houses built from rough-cut timber. Halfway through town, a woman in a faded dress called out from the store's porch. "That your mail-order bride, Mercer?" Rowan didn't slow down, didn't even turn his head. "Someone actually married him," another voice laughed. "Poor thing doesn't know what she's in for." "Probably desperate. Look at her. I bet she's running from something." The words hit like physical blows, but Evelyn kept her face blank. She'd had months of practice in Philadelphia, learning to endure public humiliation with her head high. Then Rowan's voice cut through the laughter, flat and final. "Next person who speaks about my wife answers to me." Silence dropped over the street like a curtain. The horse kept moving, carrying them out of town and up a steep trail that switchbacked through dense forest. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. My wife. He'd called her that before they'd even spoken their vows, before she'd spent a single night under his roof, defending her to strangers who meant nothing to him. She didn't know what to do with that information. The trail climbed higher, steeper, until Evelyn's ears popped and her breath came shorter in the thin air. Just when she thought they'd ride straight off the edge of the world, they rounded a final bend, and there it was. The cabin. Built from logs chinked with mud and moss, it sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Solid, practical, built to survive rather than impress. A stone chimney rose from one end, smoke already trailing from the top. Split firewood was stacked 8 feet high against the north wall. A small barn stood nearby, probably for the horse and whatever other animals he kept. Rowan dismounted and helped her down, his hands careful despite their roughness. "Not much," he said. "But it's sturdy. Never lost the roof in a storm." Evelyn looked at the cabin and felt something unexpected loosen in her chest. After months of running, of fear, of sleeping in train stations and boarding houses where cockroaches scattered when you lit the lamp, this looked like safety. "It's fine," she managed. "Barn's over there, wells behind the cabin, outhouses." He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "You're probably tired. Come inside." The interior matched the exterior. One room, maybe 20 feet square, everything built for function over comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already crackling with warmth. A rough table, 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies. A bed in the corner, piled with furs and woolen blankets. One bed. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Rowan must have read her face because he gestured toward the corner. "That's yours. I'll sleep by the fire." "You don't have to." "It's not negotiable." He moved past her to add wood to the fire. "You traveled for days. You're exhausted. Take the bed." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion hit her like a physical weight now that they'd stopped moving. When was the last time she'd really slept? Not since Pennsylvania. Maybe before that. "The wagon's bringing your trunk," Rowan continued, not looking at her. "Should arrive before dark. There's bread on the shelf and dried venison if you're hungry. Water in the bucket by the door. It's fresh from this morning." He spoke in short, practical sentences, like he was running through a checklist. No warmth, but no cruelty either. Just facts delivered without embellishment. "Rowan?" She didn't know what she wanted to say. "Thank you. Why did you advertise for a wife? What happens now?" He finally met her eyes, and she saw something complicated there. Not quite fear, not quite regret. Maybe resignation. "You can leave if you want," he said quietly. "Wagon'll take you back to the train station. I'll pay your fare to wherever you want to go. No questions, no judgment. But decide tonight, because come morning, if you're still here, we're married. Preacher comes up from town once a month. He's due tomorrow. After that, you're stuck with me in this mountain until death or divorce." Evelyn stared at him. Most men would have demanded she honor the agreement, would have trapped her with contracts and expectations and the simple, brutal fact that she had nowhere else to go. He was offering her an escape route. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because I don't want a wife who's here because she has no choice." He turned back to the fire. "I want someone who chooses this, chooses me. Even if the reason isn't love, especially if the reason isn't love. Practical decisions last longer than romance. There was a story behind those words, old wounds that had never healed properly. Evelyn recognized the signs because she carried similar scars herself. "I need to think," she said. "Take all night." He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "I'm going to check the trap lines before dark. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Calhoun with your trunk." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with solid finality. Evelyn stood alone in the cabin and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. This morning she'd been on a wagon with men who wanted to rob her. Now she was in a mountain cabin owned by a scarred giant who defended her to strangers and offered her a way out of their arrangement. Nothing made sense. She moved to the window and watched Rowan disappear into the trees, rifle over his shoulder, comfortable in wilderness that would kill her in less than a day. This was his world, harsh, unforgiving, brutally honest. No society games, no manipulation, no Thomas Whitmore's smiling while they destroyed you. Just mountain, forest, and a man who kept his promises. Outside, the sun dropped toward the peaks and shadows lengthened across the clearing. Evelyn found the bread he'd mentioned, dense, dark, probably baked days ago, but still edible. She ate mechanically while her mind spun through options she didn't really have. Go back to Pennsylvania? Thomas Whitmore would find her within a week. Find work in some other city? With her reputation? Single women didn't get many opportunities, even without scandal attached to their names. Stay here and marry a stranger? The door rattled and she nearly screamed before Calhoun's voice came through. Brought your trunk, Miss Hart. She unbarred the door and helped him drag the heavy trunk inside. He looked around the cabin with obvious curiosity, but didn't comment on Rowan's absence. Mercer treat you all right? He asked. Yes. Good. Calhoun shifted his weight, uncomfortable with whatever he wanted to say next. Listen, I know this ain't my business, but Rowan Mercer's not a bad man. Rough, yeah, not much for talking. But he's honest, and that counts for something out here. You could do a lot worse. Did he pay you to say that? Hell no, man barely speaks 10 words a month. Calhoun headed for the door. I'm saying it because folks in town will tell you stories. War hero gone wrong, violent, dangerous. Some of it's true, some isn't, but none of it's the whole truth. Just give him a fair chance before you decide. That's all. After he left, Evelyn opened her trunk and stared at her belongings. Dresses that had been fashionable in Philadelphia and would be absurd here. Books. A few pieces of jewelry she hadn't been able to bring herself to sell. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was the last letter Thomas Whitmore had sent her. She took it out, read it one final time. You made a fool of me in front of my peers. You humiliated me with your rejection. Did you truly believe there would be no consequences? I am not a man who accepts defiance from women who should know their place. If you will not come to me willingly, I will ensure you have nowhere else to go. No one will hire you. No one will house you. No one will speak to you without risking my displeasure. You will learn, Evelyn, that refusing Thomas Whitmore was the greatest mistake of your life. Her hands shook as she fed the letter to the fire and watched it burn. She'd made her choice the moment she'd boarded that train in Philadelphia. Everything since then had just been the long, hard road to accepting it. When Rowan returned an hour later, arms full of firewood, Evelyn was sitting at the table with her decision made. He stopped in the doorway, reading her face. You staying? Yes. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. All right then. Preacher comes up tomorrow around noon. Simple ceremony, nothing fancy. I don't need fancy. Good. He stacked the wood by the fire with methodical precision. I'll sleep out here. You take the bed. We can figure out the rest later. Rowan, she needed to say something, to acknowledge what he'd done for her without even knowing her. Thank you for earlier. On the road. He didn't turn around. Men who prey on lone women are cowards. I don't tolerate cowards. And in town, when those people, oh, you're my wife. He said it like that explained everything. Maybe it did. Nobody insults my wife. The conversation died there, falling into comfortable silence, broken only by the fire's crackle. Rowan moved around the cabin with economical efficiency, preparing a simple meal of beans and venison. They ate without talking, two strangers about to tie their lives together based on nothing more than mutual desperation and fragile hope. That night, Evelyn lay in the bed that smelled like pine and wood smoke, listening to Rowan settle himself by the fire. Through the window, stars blazed across the black sky in numbers she'd never seen in Philadelphia's gaslit streets. The mountain pressed close around the cabin, vast and indifferent, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere in that darkness, Thomas Whitmore's influence ended. Whatever happened next, it would be her choice. Morning came cold and bright, frost covering everything in crystalline white. Evelyn woke to find Rowan already gone, but he'd left the fire burning and hot coffee warming on the stone hearth. She dressed in her least damaged traveling dress, dark blue wool that had survived the journey better than the silk and muslin, and tried to imagine what came after this day. The preacher arrived at noon exactly, riding a mule up the mountain trail with the weary patience of someone who'd made this trip many times before. He was old, thin, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Rowan Mercer," he greeted, "finally taking a wife. Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I," Rowan said honestly. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. No rings, no flowers, no guests. Just 3 people standing in front of a cabin while the preacher read from a Bible held together with string and spoke words that bound strangers into family. "Do you, Rowan Mercer, take this woman as your lawful wife?" "I do." "And do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man as your lawful husband?" She looked at Rowan, this scarred mountain of a man who'd defended her, protected her, offered her escape even when it cost him everything he'd hoped to gain, who asked for nothing except that she choose him freely. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado and before the witness of creation, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss. Rowan just nodded once, and the preacher marked something in a worn ledger that served as official record. "That's $20, the preacher said. Rowan paid without hesitation, and the old man climbed back on his mule, leaving behind 2 married strangers who had no idea what came next. They stood in the clearing, watching him disappear down the trail. The silence stretched until Evelyn couldn't stand it anymore. "Now what?" Rowan turned toward the cabin. "Now we survive winter. Everything else is extra." It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly hopeful. But it was honest, and after months of pretty lies and broken promises, Evelyn found she preferred the brutal truth. Winter was coming to the mountain, and she'd just married a man she didn't know, in a place she didn't understand, with no way back to the life she'd lost. But standing there in the thin mountain air, watching smoke curl from the chimney of a cabin that was now legally hers as much as his, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Not happiness. Not yet. But maybe the distant possibility of it. And for now, that was enough. The first week of marriage taught Evelyn that surviving on a mountain required skills Philadelphia had never prepared her for. Water didn't come from taps. It came from a well 50 yards behind the cabin, and hauling 2 full buckets back without spilling half the contents took strength her arms didn't possess yet. The first time she tried, water sloshed over the rims with every step, soaking her skirt and boots until she stood shivering in the clearing with maybe half of what she'd started with. Rowan appeared from the tree line, a dead rabbit hanging from his belt. He looked at the wet trail she'd left, the barely full buckets, her shaking hands. "You're gripping too tight," he said. "Stiff arms make it worse. Keep your shoulders loose. Let the bucket swing a little with your walk." He didn't laugh at her, didn't sigh with exasperation or make her feel stupid, just stated the problem and offered a solution before disappearing into the cabin with his kill. The next morning, she found the buckets were smaller. He'd replaced them during the night without saying a word. Firewood was another lesson in humiliation. The logs Rowan split with 2 or 3 efficient strikes took her 20 attempts and left her hands covered in blisters that broke and bled before she'd managed to split even one piece properly. She wrapped her palms in torn cloth and kept swinging the axe, because quitting wasn't an option. Not here. Not when winter was coming and frozen meant dead. On the 3rd day, Rowan took the axe from her hands mid-swing. "You're doing it wrong." "I'm trying. Trying doesn't keep you warm when it's 20 below." He positioned himself behind the chopping block, demonstrating the motion in slow segments. "You're fighting the wood. Let the axe do the work. Gravity and momentum. Your job is just to aim and follow through." He made it look simple. When Evelyn tried again, the axe bounced off the log and nearly took her foot off. Rowan caught the handle before she could swing again. Watch. He guided her hands to the correct position on the handle, adjusted her stance, showed her where to focus her eyes. His hands were rough with calluses built over decades of this exact work, and they dwarfed hers completely. Now swing! She did. The axe bit deep into the wood, and the log split with a crack that surprised them both. Again, Rowan said. By the time the sun dropped behind the western peaks, she'd split an entire log into firewood. Her shoulders screamed, and her back felt like it might never straighten properly, but she'd done it. Rowan stacked her work beside the cabin wall without comment, but that night he served her an extra portion of venison stew. They didn't talk much those first weeks. Rowan left before dawn to check trap lines scattered across miles of wilderness, and he returned near dark, smelling like pine smoke and animal blood. Some days he brought back pelts, mink, beaver, fox. Other days he came back empty-handed and went straight to his workbench to repair damaged traps with the focused intensity of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. Evelyn learned the cabin's rhythms by watching him. Coffee before dawn, always strong enough to strip paint. Beans and whatever meat he'd caught, cooked in the same cast-iron pot every night. He cleaned his rifle with the same methodical care some men reserve for children or horses. Everything had its place, its purpose, its routine. She tried to fit herself into that routine without disrupting the patterns that had kept him alive this long. Some nights he carved by the fire, small wooden figures that he set on the shelf with the others. A bear, a hawk, a wolf mid-howl. His hands moved with surprising delicacy for someone his size, finding shapes in wood that she couldn't see until they emerged fully formed. "Where did you learn that?" she asked one night, unable to contain her curiosity. "Prison camp. During the war." He didn't look up from the piece he was working on. Something with wings, maybe an owl. Had to do something, or go crazy. "Which side?" "Union, 2nd Colorado Infantry." His knife bit into the wood with precise cuts. "We were supposed to protect supply lines through the Rockies, ended up in Confederate hands for 8 months before they traded us back." Evelyn waited, but he didn't elaborate. The fire crackled, and outside something howled in the distance. Wolves or coyotes, she still couldn't tell the difference. "What about you?" Rowan asked without looking up. "What did a Philadelphia woman do before she became a mountain wife?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Evelyn's throat tightened. "I taught piano," she said carefully, "to wealthy families. Their daughters mostly." "That how you met him? The one you were running from?" Her hands clenched in her lap. She hadn't told him about Thomas Whitmore, but apparently she didn't need to. Rowan read people the way he read weather and animal tracks, paying attention to the signs everyone else missed. "His niece was my student," Evelyn said quietly. "He started attending the lessons, bringing gifts, making it clear he expected something in return. And when you refused, he made me regret it." The words came out bitter and hard. "Told everyone I'd stolen from his family. Spread rumors that I'd tried to seduce him. By the time he finished, every family I'd taught for had dismissed me. The boarding house evicted me. Even the church wouldn't let me attend services." Rowan's knife stopped moving. He finally looked at her, his gray eyes steady in the firelight. Men like that deserve killing. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't even anger exactly. Just a flat statement of fact delivered with the same tone he used for weather predictions. "I thought about it," Evelyn admitted. "For a while I really thought about it." "What stopped you?" "Fear. Practicality. The knowledge that they'd hang me for it while he'd get a respectful funeral." She stared at her hands, at the new calluses forming over the blisters. "So I ran instead." Rowan nodded once and went back to his carving. The conversation ended there, but something shifted between them. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. They were both survivors of different wars, carrying scars that didn't show on their skin. The weather turned colder as October bled into November. Frost appeared every morning now, thick white blankets that didn't burn off until noon. Rowan spent longer hours checking his trap lines, coming back later each night with the driven urgency of someone racing against a deadline only he could see. "Storm's coming," he said one evening, studying the sky with the focus most men reserve for holy texts. "Big one. Maybe 3 days out." "How can you tell?" The way the wind smells. How the birds are acting. Been reading mountain weather my whole life. He looked at their dwindling wood supply and frowned. We need more firewood. Lot more. For 2 days they worked until Evelyn thought her arms might fall off. Rowan felled trees with an efficiency that was almost frightening, and she split the logs he cut into pieces small enough to burn. Her hands bled through the cloth wrappings. Her back felt like someone had driven nails into her spine. But she kept swinging the axe because Rowan said they needed more wood, and she'd learned he didn't exaggerate about survival. On the second night, she collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots. Rowan looked up from sharpening his knife. You need to eat. Too tired. Eat anyway. He brought her a bowl of stew and stood there until she sat up and took it. Can't work if you don't eat, can't survive if you don't work. Is everything about survival here? Everything worth talking about. She ate the stew in resentful silence while her muscles screamed and her blistered palms made, holding the spoon an exercise in misery. Rowan watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pity, not approval, something more complicated. You're stronger than you look, he said finally. I don't feel strong. Strong isn't a feeling. It's what you do when you don't feel like you can keep going. He took her empty bowl. Philadelphia didn't make you soft, just unprepared. There's a difference. The storm hit on the third day exactly as he'd predicted. Evelyn woke to a darkness so complete she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. Wind screamed against the cabin walls with the fury of something alive and furious. Snow hammered the roof with a sound like thousands of fists pounding simultaneously. She stumbled out of bed and nearly collided with Rowan in the dark. Stay away from the walls, he said, his voice cutting through the wind. If the roof goes, the walls collapse inward. The roof won't go. She tried to sound confident and failed completely. Probably not. He moved toward the fireplace by memory, alone, building up the fire until orange light pushed back the darkness. But I've seen it happen. Just stay in the center. The storm raged for 2 days straight. They couldn't go outside without risking immediate death. Snow piled against the door until Rowan had to dig them out twice just to prevent being buried alive. The temperature inside the cabin dropped so low that Evelyn could see her breath even sitting 3 feet from the fire. On the second night, when the wind had reached a pitch that sounded like the mountain itself was screaming, she started shivering so violently her teeth rattled. Rowan looked up from adding wood to the fire. You're freezing. Just cold. Cold kills fast up here. He stood and moved toward the bed. Come on. What? The bed. We're sharing it tonight. Only way to stay warm enough. Evelyn's heart hammered for entirely different reasons now. I don't think... I'm not interested in your virtue, Evelyn. I'm interested in not finding you frozen in the morning. He pulled back the furs and blankets. Get in before you lose feeling in your fingers. She climbed into the bed with limbs that felt like wood. Rowan got in behind her, and the size difference was almost comical. He took up 3/4 of the space, his body radiating heat like a furnace. He pulled the blankets over them both and settled in, facing away from her. Try to sleep, he said, but Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay there rigid with tension, hyper-aware of every point where their bodies nearly touched, but didn't quite. This man was her husband, legally, but they were still strangers in every way that mattered. She didn't know his favorite food or his worst fear or whether he'd ever loved anyone before the war turned him into stone. Outside, the storm tried to tear the cabin apart. An hour passed, maybe 2. The shivering wouldn't stop. You're still freezing, Rowan said into the darkness. I'm fine. Without warning, he turned over and pulled her against his chest, wrapping one massive arm around her waist and tucking her into the curve of his body. The heat of him was almost shocking after so many hours of cold. Better? He asked. Evelyn couldn't speak. She just nodded against his chest. Good. Now sleep. He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of someone who'd learned to rest anywhere under any circumstances. But Evelyn stayed awake for a long time, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back, and trying to remember the last time she'd felt this safe next to another human being. Maybe never. The storm finally broke on the third morning, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. Snow had buried everything, the woodpile, the well, the trail down to town. When Rowan opened the cabin door, they faced a wall of snow taller than Evelyn's head. Gonna take hours to dig out, he said, already reaching for the shovel. They worked in shifts, Rowan breaking through the worst of it while Evelyn cleared paths to the well and the barn where the horse waited. Her muscles had adapted somewhat over the past weeks, but this level of labor revealed new limits she hadn't known existed. Around midday, they stopped to rest and eat cold biscuits left from before the storm. Evelyn sat on the chopping block, too exhausted to care that her skirt was soaked and her hands had started bleeding again. "How do you do this every year?" she asked. "Practice." Rowan studied the amount of work still ahead of them. "And you learn to expect it. Winter here isn't a guest that comes and goes. It's a siege. You either prepare properly or you die." Cheerful. Honest. He stood and stretched, joints cracking. "You did good during the storm. Didn't panic. Didn't complain." "I complained plenty in my head." "Doesn't count if you don't say it out loud." He offered her his hand to help her up. "Come on. 3 more hours of work, then we can rest." She took his hand, noting how her smaller one disappeared completely into his grip. He pulled her to her feet with no apparent effort, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see individual scars on his face, the big one through his eyebrow, smaller ones on his cheek, one at the corner of his mouth that pulled his expression slightly to one side. "What happened there?" She gestured toward the scar through his eyebrow before she could stop herself. "Confederate bayonet in a tunnel fight. Nearly lost the eye." He released her hand and stepped back. "The ones on my back are worse, but you can't see those." "From the prison camp? And other places?" He picked up the shovel again, clearly done with the conversation. "War marks everyone. Just a question of whether the marks show on the outside or not." They worked until sunset, and by then they'd carved out enough space to access everything they needed. Evelyn's entire body felt like one giant bruise, but she'd helped dig them out of a blizzard. She'd survived her first major mountain storm. That night, Rowan made a stew that actually tasted like something besides beans and regret. He'd added dried herbs she didn't know he had, and the meat was tender from slow cooking. "This is good," she said, surprised. "Don't sound so shocked. I've been feeding myself for 40 years. How old are you exactly?" 42. You? 26. He nodded like he'd already guessed as much. They ate in silence for a while, but it felt different than the silences from early weeks. More comfortable. Less like two strangers avoiding conversation, and more like two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said finally. "You just did. Why did you really send for a wife? And don't say it was just practical." Rowan set down his bowl and stared into the fire. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "I broke my leg 2 winters ago," he said quietly. "Bad break. Compound fracture. Happened 10 miles from the cabin in snow up to my chest. Took me 8 hours to crawl home, and another 2 days before I could set the bone myself." Evelyn's stomach turned, imagining it. "Spent 6 weeks mostly immobile, rationing food I could barely reach, hoping the leg would heal before infection set in, or I starved." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Realized that next time I might not make it back. One mistake up here and you're just bones for the wolves to scatter. Nobody would even find me until spring thaw." "That's when you decided?" "That's when I admitted I couldn't keep doing this alone." He finally looked at her. "I don't expect love, Evelyn. Don't even expect friendship necessarily. But I needed someone who could help survive this place. Someone who wouldn't quit when it got hard. And if I did quit? If I'd taken your offer to leave? Then I'd have tried again with someone else." He returned his attention to the fire. "But you didn't quit. You're still here, bleeding hands and all." Something warm moved through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm glad I stayed." Rowan nodded once, and they didn't talk about it again. November became December, and the cold intensified to levels Evelyn hadn't known existed. Some mornings the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the bucket overnight. Her breath came out in visible clouds even inside the cabin. They started sharing the bed every night without discussion. Pure survival, nothing more. But Evelyn found herself looking forward to those hours when Rowan's body heat kept the worst of the cold at bay, and she could sleep without shivering. She learned other things too. How to cure meat so it lasted months. How to make soap from animal fat and lye. How to patch her clothes with leather scraps when fabric tore beyond normal repair. Rowan taught her with the patience of someone who understood that knowing how to do these things meant the difference between living and dying. "You're a good teacher," she told him one afternoon while he showed her how to properly skin a rabbit. "Had to learn most of it alone. Makes you better at explaining." He guided her knife along the proper line. "When nobody shows you, you remember every mistake. Don't want you making the same ones." "Did you always live alone? Even before the war?" His hands stilled. "No. Had a wife once, long time ago." Evelyn's stomach dropped. He'd never mentioned this before. "What happened?" she asked carefully. "Died in childbirth, her and the baby both." He returned to his work, movements mechanical now. "I was away fighting. Got word 3 months after she was buried. By the time I made it home, grass had already grown over the grave." "Rowan, I'm so—" "Don't." His voice went hard. "It was 20 years ago. Different life, different man. No point pretending sympathy changes what happened. But it explained so much. The isolation, the advertisement that promised nothing, the way he'd offered her an escape route because he knew what it was like to be trapped by circumstances you couldn't control." They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, and that night Evelyn lay awake in the dark, listening to him breathe on the other side of the bed, wondering what his first wife had been like, and whether any part of him still loved her ghost. The trip into Black Ridge came in mid-December when they ran low on supplies that couldn't be hunted or foraged. Rowan loaded the horse with pelts to trade, while Evelyn dressed in her warmest clothes and tried to prepare herself for the townspeople's stares. The ride down took 2 hours through snow that reached the horse's knees. Black Ridge looked even smaller in winter. Half the buildings shuttered until spring, maybe 50 people total still living in the valley. But the general store was open, and that's where Rowan tied the horse before helping Evelyn down. Inside, the warmth hit like a physical wall. 3 women browsed shelves near the back, while the shopkeeper, a tired-looking man named Walsh, weighed out flour behind the counter. The women stopped talking the moment Evelyn walked in. "Mrs. Mercer," one of them said with false sweetness, "we heard you survived the November storm. That must have been terrifying for a city girl." "We managed," Evelyn said carefully. "I'm sure you did." The woman's eyes traveled over Evelyn's worn dress and work-roughened hands. "Though I suppose Rowan was there to protect you. He's always been good at that sort of thing." Something poisonous lurked under the polite words. Evelyn forced a smile and moved toward the counter where Rowan was negotiating prices with Walsh. "Those are fine pelts," Walsh admitted, examining the furs with a critical eye. "I can give you store credit or half in cash." "Credit's fine. We need flour, coffee, salt, and—" Rowan glanced at Evelyn. "Anything else?" Before she could answer, one of the women spoke up again. "You know, Mrs. Mercer, we've been wondering about you. A Philadelphia woman marrying a mountain trapper sight unseen? There must be quite a story there." The other women leaned in, hungry for gossip. "Not much of a story," Evelyn said. "He needed a wife. I needed to leave Philadelphia." "But why did you need to leave?" The question came wrapped in fake concern. "It seems suspicious, doesn't it? A young woman fleeing to the frontier?" "Careful, Margaret." Rowan's voice cut through the store like winter wind. He hadn't turned around, was still facing Walsh and the counter, but the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "My wife's past is none of your concern." "I was only asking a friendly question." "No, you weren't." Now he turned, and the women stepped back instinctively. "You were spreading poison because that's what small minds do when they're bored. My wife is here, she's staying, and the next person who questions her reputation answers to me. Are we clear?" Dead silence filled the store. Margaret's face flushed red, but she nodded and hurried toward the door with her friends scrambling after her. The bell chimed as they fled, leaving Evelyn and Rowan alone with Walsh, who suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. "Apologize for that," Walsh muttered. "Margaret's got a sharp tongue and not enough sense to control it." "Not your fault." Rowan returned his attention to the supplies. "Add in some dried fruit if you've got it, and that tea Evelyn was looking at last time." "I didn't—" Evelyn started, then stopped. She had looked at the tea briefly before deciding it was too expensive, but Rowan had noticed anyway. They loaded the supplies onto the horse in tense silence. The ride back up the mountain stretched even longer than the trip down, but halfway home Rowan finally spoke. "Shouldn't have done that," he said. "Done what?" "Threatened those women. They'll make your life harder now. They were already making my life harder. Evelyn adjusted her grip on his waist as the horse navigated a steep section. At least now they know I'm not alone. You're not. He said it simply, like stating a fact. Long as you're my wife, you're not alone. Something cracked open in Evelyn's chest, some frozen thing that had been locked tight since Philadelphia. She pressed her face against Rowan's back and let herself feel it, this strange growing thing that might eventually become trust. Back at the cabin, they unpacked the supplies in comfortable routine. Rowan made coffee while Evelyn sorted the dried goods onto their proper shelves. Outside, early darkness swallowed the clearing and wolves sang somewhere in the distance. Thank you, she said, for the tea. You work hard enough, deserve something nice sometimes. That's not very practical. He almost smiled. Maybe I'm learning that practical isn't everything. That night they fell into their routine, Rowan carving by the fire while Evelyn mended clothes that constantly needed repair. The quiet stretched between them, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of things they were both learning how to say. When they finally climbed into bed, Rowan pulled her against him without hesitation. This was normal now, this careful arrangement of bodies seeking warmth and finding something more complicated in the process. Evelyn? His voice rumbled through his chest into her back. Yes? You did good today, in town. Held your head up when they were trying to tear you down. She laced her fingers through his where they rested against her stomach. I learned from the best. His arm tightened slightly and they fell asleep like that, two damaged people learning that maybe survival wasn't the whole story. Maybe there was something worth living for beyond just making it through another winter. Outside, the mountain waited with all its dangers and all its promise, and inside the cabin, two strangers were becoming something more. Christmas came and went with nothing to mark it except Rowan bringing home a wild turkey instead of the usual rabbit or venison. They ate it by firelight while wind rattled the shutters, and Evelyn realized she was happier in this isolated cabin than she'd ever been at Philadelphia holiday parties where crystal chandeliers sparkled and women wore silk that cost more than most people earned in a year. Did you celebrate much before? She asked, watching Rowan carve slices of meat with his hunting knife. Not really. My first wife liked the church services, but after she died, I stopped seeing the point. He handed her a plate piled with food. What about you? My family made a production of it. Decorations, parties, concerts, all very proper and expensive and hollow. She took a bite and the flavor surprised her. He'd actually seasoned it with something. This is good. Found wild sage near the South Ridge. Thought it might help. He ate in that efficient way of his, like fuel more than enjoyment. We should go to town for the New Year gathering. Let people see you're still alive. Do we have to? Unfortunately. He refilled her coffee from the pot on the hearth. Margaret's been spreading new rumors since we were there last. Might as well face them down before they get worse. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She'd been dreading this conversation since their last trip to Black Ridge. What kind of rumors? The usual poison? That you're hiding some scandal? That you're not really my wife, just some woman I'm keeping up here? His jaw clenched. That you'll run off come spring when you realize how hard mountain life is. That last one might be the kindest thing she's said about me. You're not running. He said it with absolute certainty, like he could see into her future and knew exactly what she'd choose. How can you be sure? Because you would have left after that first storm if you were going to leave at all. He met her eyes across the table. You're tougher than they give you credit for. Hell, you're tougher than I gave you credit for. The compliment landed awkwardly between them, neither quite sure what to do with this new honesty. Evelyn looked away first, feeling heat in her face that had nothing to do with the fire. When's this gathering? She asked. New Year's Day. Starts at noon in the meeting hall, mostly an excuse for people to drink and forget winter for a few hours. He stood and started clearing their plates. We don't have to stay long, just long enough to remind them you exist. The week leading up to New Year passed in their usual rhythm of work and silence, and the strange intimacy of two people learning each other's patterns. Evelyn had started anticipating Rowan's needs before he asked. Hot coffee ready when he came in from morning chores, his rifle cleaned and loaded before he checked the trap lines, extra wood by the fire because he always built it up before bed. He did the same for her. Smaller buckets appeared when her shoulders ached. He brought back pine nuts and wild berries when he found them. luxuries that broke the monotony of dried meat and beans. At night, he pulled her close without preamble, his body heat a necessity that had somehow become comfort. They didn't talk about it, didn't analyze what was happening between them, but Evelyn felt it growing anyway, this thing that was more than survival and not quite love, but maybe the foundation of it. On New Year's morning, she dressed in her least worn dress, dark green wool that had survived the journey west better than most of her Philadelphia wardrobe. She tried to do something with her hair, but months of mountain life had left it damaged and uncooperative. Eventually, she gave up and braided it simply. Rowan appeared in the doorway wearing clean clothes she'd never seen him in. He'd even trimmed his beard, though the scars still showed clearly through it. "You look nice," he said awkwardly. "So do you." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd become accustomed to working together in silence, suddenly unsure how to navigate this different context. "We should go," Rowan said finally, "before I change my mind about this whole thing." The ride down took longer than usual because ice had made the trail treacherous. Rowan guided the horse with the careful precision of someone who'd seen what happened when you took risks in winter, and Evelyn held on to him while trying not to think about the drop-offs hidden under fresh snow. Black Ridge looked almost festive when they arrived. Someone had strung up lanterns between the buildings, and smoke poured from the meeting hall chimney. Voices and rough laughter carried through the cold air. A dozen horses stood tied outside, their breath forming clouds in the frigid afternoon. Rowan helped Evelyn down, and she felt his hesitation before they walked inside. His hand found hers and squeezed once. Reassurance or warning, she couldn't tell which. The meeting hall was packed with nearly everyone who'd stayed in Black Ridge for winter. 50 people, maybe more, crowded around tables laden with food and drink. Conversations died when Rowan and Evelyn entered, heads turning to stare at the mountain man and his city bride. Margaret stood near the back with her friends, their expressions hungry for confrontation. "Rowan Mercer!" a gruff voice called out. Walsh, the shopkeeper, waved them over to where he stood with several other men. "Didn't think you'd come down from your fortress." Evelyn wanted to see people. Rowan guided her toward the group with his hand still on her back. "Walsh, you remember my wife?" "Of course. Mrs. Mercer." Walsh nodded respectfully. "How are you finding mountain life?" "It's different," Evelyn said carefully, "but I'm managing." "More than managing from what I hear," one of the other men said, a trapper named Coleman who lived even further up the mountain than Rowan. "Heard you split your own firewood now. That's more than half the women in this town can claim." "Half the men, too," another trapper added, and several people laughed. The conversation flowed easier than Evelyn expected. These rough mountain men treated her with more respect than Philadelphia society ever had, judging her on capability rather than breeding or scandal. Rowan stayed close but let her handle herself, only intervening when someone asked a question that veered too personal. Then Margaret appeared with a glass of something that smelled like turpentine and bad decisions. "Mrs. Mercer," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you could join us. We were just discussing you this morning." "Were you?" Evelyn kept her voice neutral. "Oh, yes. Sarah was saying how brave you are, coming all the way from Philadelphia to marry a complete stranger." Margaret's smile was all teeth and poison. "Though I suppose when you're desperate enough, you'll do anything." The nearby conversations quieted. People leaned in, sensing blood. "I wasn't desperate," Evelyn said clearly. "I was making a choice." "Really? Because we heard some interesting things about why you left Philadelphia. Something about a scandal with a wealthy man?" Margaret took a sip of her drink, eyes glittering with malice. "People don't usually flee across the country unless they've done something worth fleeing from." Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. Every eye in the hall was on her now, watching to see if the refined city woman would crumble under frontier justice. Rowan moved to intervene, but Evelyn touched his arm, stopping him. This was her fight. "You're right," she said, and Margaret's smile widened. "I did flee Philadelphia. A powerful man decided he wanted me, and when I refused him, he destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that I had no choice but to leave." Silence rippled through the hall. "He spread lies about me, turned my friends against me, made sure I couldn't work, couldn't survive in the only city I'd ever known." Evelyn's voice stayed steady even as her heart raced. "So yes, I ran. I came here because Rowan offered me a chance at a life where my worth wasn't determined by men who thought they owned me. Margaret's smile faltered. "And you know what I found?" Evelyn continued. "A man who keeps his word, who treats me like a partner instead of property, who defends me without expecting anything in return." She looked at Rowan, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "So if you want to call that desperation, go ahead, but I call it the smartest decision I've ever made." The hall erupted in scattered applause, and several people actually cheered. Margaret's face went red, and she retreated toward her friends, who suddenly found their drinks very interesting. Walsh raised his glass. "To Mrs. Mercer. Tougher than she looks, and smart enough to know it." People laughed and drank, and the tension broke like spring ice. Conversations resumed, and Evelyn found herself surrounded by women asking genuine questions about life in the high cabin, sharing advice about winter survival, treating her like someone who belonged. Rowan pulled her aside an hour later, away from the crowd. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did. I'm tired of running from the truth." She met his eyes. "And I meant what I said about you, about this being the right choice." Something shifted in his expression, that wall he kept between himself and the world cracking just slightly. His hand came up to cup her face, calloused thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Evelyn." "Mercer!" A man burst through the hall door, snow covering his coat and panic in his eyes. "Your cabin. There's smoke coming from the ridge, a lot of smoke." Rowan went completely still. "What?" "Saw it from my place about 20 minutes ago. Thought you should know." They were on the horse and racing up the mountain before the man finished speaking. Rowan pushed the animal harder than was safe on icy trails, but Evelyn understood why. Everything they owned, everything they needed to survive, it was all in that cabin. The smell hit them before they saw it. Acrid smoke carried on the wind, thick and wrong. They rounded the final bend, and Evelyn's heart stopped. The cabin stood intact, but the barn was gone. Just a blackened skeleton of timbers still smoking in the snow, the roof collapsed inward. Rowan's horse screamed somewhere in the trees, having broken free before the fire consumed everything. Rowan dismounted before the horse fully stopped and ran toward the ruins. Evelyn followed, slipping on ice, her dress catching on burned wood. The heat still radiated from the wreckage despite the snow and cold. "The pelts," Rowan said hoarsely. 6 months of work. All my winter stores. Everything. He stood staring at the destruction, and Evelyn saw something she'd never seen before. Rowan Mercer looking lost. His shoulders slumped and his hands hung uselessly at his sides, and for the first time since they'd met, he seemed genuinely defeated. "We can rebuild," Evelyn said, knowing how hollow it sounded. "With what?" "Those pelts were our income until spring. Without them—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "We'll survive winter? Barely. But we can't afford to rebuild. Can't replace the horse tack or the tools that were in there. Can't do anything except hang on and hope nothing else goes wrong." Evelyn looked at the smoking ruins and made a decision. "I have jewelry," she said. "From Philadelphia. I kept it hidden in my trunk. Probably worth enough to replace what we lost, and then some." Rowan turned to stare at her. "You've had jewelry this whole time and didn't tell me?" "I was saving it, in case I needed to run again." She met his eyes. "But I'm not running anymore. This is my home now. Our home. We use the jewelry to rebuild." "Evelyn, that's probably all you have left from your old life, and my old life tried to destroy me. This one gave me a chance to survive." She took his hand, cold and rough and trembling slightly, with suppressed emotion. "We're in this together. That's what you said, so let me help." He pulled her against him suddenly, fiercely, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking and realized with shock that he was crying. This mountain of a man who'd survived war and imprisonment and 20 years of isolation, breaking in her arms over a burned barn. "I thought I was going to lose everything again," he whispered. "The cabin, you, everything." "You're not losing me." She held him tighter. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood like that in the clearing while smoke drifted around them and snow began falling again, two people who'd found something in each other that neither had been looking for. That night they salvaged what they could from the ruins. Some tools, a few metal implements that had survived the fire. The horse eventually calmed enough to be caught and brought to the cabin, where they improvised shelter under the eaves. Evelyn dug through her trunk and found the jewelry she'd kept hidden. A pearl necklace, 2 gold bracelets, a ring with a small diamond. Worth more than 6 months of pelts. Worth enough to rebuild twice over. Rowan held the jewelry in hands blackened with soot and ash. This is too much. It's exactly enough. She closed his fingers around the pieces. Besides, what was I going to do with pearls on a mountain? Wear them while I split firewood? He almost smiled, which felt like a miracle given the day's disasters. They ate a sparse dinner and went to bed early, exhausted from the adrenaline crash and the realization of how close they'd come to genuine catastrophe. Rowan pulled Evelyn against him with desperate intensity, like he needed to prove she was real and still there. I was wrong, he said into the darkness. Earlier, when I said practical decisions last longer than romance. Why? Because what I feel for you isn't practical, it's not logical, it doesn't make sense. His arm tightened around her waist. But it's real anyway. Evelyn turned in his arms to face him, seeing his face in the faint firelight. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words came out rough and uncertain, like he wasn't used to speaking them. I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it, but somewhere between teaching you to split wood and watching you stand up to Margaret's poison, it happened anyway. Her throat tightened. Rowan, you don't have to say it back. I know this started as a practical arrangement and she kissed him. It wasn't graceful or smooth. Their teeth clicked and she missed his mouth slightly at first, and he made a surprise sound that might have been funny under different circumstances. But then his hand came up to cradle her head, and he kissed her back with the same desperate intensity he brought to everything that mattered to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn pressed her forehead against his. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it. Scared of what? That it would disappear. That I'd wake up and this would all be another lie. She touched his face, feeling the scars under her fingers. But you're real. This is real. And I'm done being afraid of it. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the feel of her mouth against his. His hands moved over her body with reverence and need combined, and Evelyn realized this was what she'd been moving toward since the moment she'd stepped off that wagon and found him waiting in the trees. They made love slowly in the firelight while winter raged outside, two broken people discovering they could fit together after all. It wasn't perfect. They fumbled and adjusted and laughed quietly at their own awkwardness. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it mattered more than any of the polished romance Evelyn had read about in books. Afterward, lying tangled together under the furs, Rowan traced patterns on her bare shoulder. We'll go to town tomorrow, he said. Sell the jewelry, order lumber for the barn, start rebuilding. Together. Together. He kissed her temple. Though I'm keeping one piece of that jewelry. Why? Because when this is over and the barn's rebuilt and things settle down, I'm going to take you back to that preacher and marry you properly, with a ring this time. Make it official in more than just legal terms. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. We're already married. On paper, because it was practical. He turned her face toward him. I want to marry you again because I love you, because I choose you. Not out of necessity, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. She kissed him instead of answering, pouring everything she couldn't say into the gesture. Outside, snow continued falling, and somewhere in the darkness the mountain waited with all its dangers and all its promise. But inside the cabin, two people who'd fled from different kinds of pain had finally found something worth holding on to. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. They rode to Black Ridge with the jewelry wrapped in cloth and a plan sketched out between them. Walsh connected them with a buyer passing through, a merchant from Denver who paid fair prices and asked no questions about why a mountain woman had Philadelphia society jewelry. The money was enough to rebuild the barn and replace their lost supplies with plenty left over. Rowan ordered lumber to be delivered as soon as the roads allowed, probably late January if the weather held. They bought new tools, horse tack, and enough food to see them through to spring without rationing. Margaret was in the general store when they finished their business. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something cutting, but Rowan just put his arm around Evelyn's shoulders, and Margaret shut her mouth again. People are going to talk, Evelyn said on the ride home. Let them. They'll find something else to gossip about eventually. He pulled her closer against the cold. Besides, after yesterday, half the town thinks you're the bravest woman they've ever met. Margaret's losing her audience. Does that mean we won't have to come down here as often? Definitely means that. They spent the rest of January preparing for the rebuild. Rowan cleared the barn site and salvaged what materials could be reused. Evelyn helped where she could, though he made her rest more than she wanted to. The work was hard but different now. They moved together with the easy coordination of a team that had learned each other's rhythms. At night, they lay tangled together while Rowan told her stories from his past that he'd never shared before. About growing up in Colorado before it was even a territory, when mountain men and Ute tribes were the only humans for hundreds of miles. About the war and the things he'd seen that still woke him up sometimes with his heart racing. About his first wife, Sarah, who'd been gentle and kind and completely unprepared for frontier life, but had tried anyway because she loved him. "She would have liked you," he said one night. "She would have appreciated how strong you are." "I'm not that strong. You walked into a blizzard to find me last month when I got turned around checking the north traps. Most people would have waited in the cabin. You could have died." "Exactly my point." He kissed her forehead. "Strong isn't just muscles and endurance. It's doing the thing that terrifies you because the alternative is worse." Evelyn thought about that while the fire crackled and wind howled and Rowan's breathing evened out into sleep. She'd spent years in Philadelphia letting fear dictate her choices. Fear of scandal, fear of poverty, fear of Thomas Whitmore's reach. But up here on this mountain, she'd learned a different kind of fear. The immediate, honest fear of cold and hunger and physical danger. And she'd learned she could face it. The lumber arrived in early February during a brief thaw. 6 men from town brought it up on wagons and stayed to help with the heavy lifting. They worked for 2 days straight, raising walls and fitting roof beams while Evelyn kept everyone fed and warm. The men treated her with easy respect now, joking with her like she was one of them instead of some fragile city transplant. On the 3rd day, Rowan hammered the final board into place and stepped back to survey their work. The new barn stood solid and strong, maybe even better built than the old one. "It's good work," Coleman said, testing one of the support beams. "Should last you another 20 years easy. Longer if I maintain it properly." Rowan shook hands with each man who'd helped, pressing money into their palms even when they protested. "Appreciate you coming all the way up here." After they left, Rowan and Evelyn stood in the clearing looking at what they'd rebuilt together. The cabin, the barn, the paths they'd carved through winter snow. This small fortress against the wilderness that had become their home. "We did it," Evelyn said. "We did." He pulled her close and she leaned into his warmth. "Though I'm keeping your jewelry money in reserve, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case this place needs something else. A proper chicken coop, maybe. Or materials for when we add on to the cabin." "Add on?" He was quiet for a moment. "Well, eventually we might need more space. If there's children, not right away," he added quickly. "But someday, if you wanted, I want." She turned to face him, seeing hope and fear warring in his expression. "I want all of it. The expanded cabin and the chickens and the children. I want a life here with you." His kiss tasted like snow and coffee and promises made real through action. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, the sun was setting behind the western peaks in shades of orange and gold that would have inspired 1,000 paintings in Philadelphia. But Evelyn wouldn't have traded this raw, honest beauty for all the refined art in the world. That night they celebrated by making love in front of the fire. Then again in their bed, learning each other's bodies with the patience of people who finally understood they had time. Rowan worshipped her scars, the ones from Thomas Whitmore's cruelty and the new ones from mountain life. She traced his in return, each mark a story of survival and strength. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted in the darkness. "After Sarah died, I accepted that loneliness was just my life now." "What changed?" "You did. You showed up half frozen and terrified, and something in me recognized something in you." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. Two broken people who refused to stay broken. "We're not broken anymore? Maybe not fixed either, but healing." He pulled her closer. Together. March brought the first hints of spring, longer days, warmer sun, patches of ground showing through the snow. Rowan started planning his trap lines for the coming season, while Evelyn turned her attention to the small garden plot behind the cabin. They'd plant vegetables come May, he told her, and she'd learn to can and preserve food for next winter. Next winter. Like there was no question she'd still be here. Like this was permanent now. One afternoon, while Rowan was hunting, Evelyn walked to the south ridge where the view opened up across miles of wilderness. Pine forests stretched endlessly, broken by granite peaks still covered in snow. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay Denver, and beyond that the plains she'd crossed to get here, and beyond that Philadelphia where Thomas Whitmore still thought he'd won. But he hadn't won. Not even close. She'd found something he could never touch, a life built on honest work and hard-earned trust. A love that had grown slowly from practical necessity into something fierce and real. A home that wasn't defined by four walls but by the man who'd offered her safety and expected nothing in return. "Thought I might find you up here," Rowan's voice came from behind her. He'd moved through the forest silent as winter itself. "Just thinking?" "About what?" "About how far I've come, how different everything is now." She turned to face him. "I don't miss Philadelphia at all. Isn't that strange?" "Not really. Hard to miss a place that hurt you." He joined her at the edge, looking out over the same view. "This place might be harsh, but it's honest. You know exactly what it expects from you. And what does it expect? Respect. Preparation. The willingness to adapt." He glanced at her. "Same things I expect from a partner." "Is that what I am?" "Your partner? What else would you be?" "We work together, survive together, build together." His arm came around her shoulders. "Love each other, apparently. That's partnership as far as I'm concerned." Evelyn leaned into him and watched the sun move across the sky, painting the snow in shades of blue and gold. Somewhere down in Black Ridge, Margaret was probably spreading new rumors. Somewhere back in Philadelphia, Thomas Whitmore had probably already forgotten her name. None of it mattered anymore. This was her life now, standing on a mountain ridge with a man who'd become her anchor, watching wilderness stretch toward forever, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring arrived slowly in the high country, grudging and unpredictable. One day, the temperature would climb enough to melt ice into rushing streams, and the next morning, everything would be frozen solid again. But gradually, the snow retreated higher up the peaks, and green things started pushing through the mud around the cabin. Evelyn planted their garden in early May under Rowan's guidance, learning which vegetables could survive the short growing season and which would just waste precious space. Her hands, already rough from winter work, developed new calluses from the shovel and hoe. She didn't mind. Each blister felt like proof she belonged here. They fell into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like actual living. Rowan checked his trap lines while Evelyn managed the cabin and garden. They worked together on larger projects, repairing the fence, improving the water system, building a proper chicken coop with lumber left over from the barn. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the sun set behind the mountains, talking about plans for the future like people who actually believed they had one. "We should get a cow," Rowan said one night, whittling another of his wooden figures. This one looked like it might become a deer. "Fresh milk would be good. Butter, cheese, if you learned how." "I don't know the first thing about keeping a cow." "Neither did I until I learned, same as everything else up here." He blew wood shavings off the carving. "Besides, you learn chickens fast enough. They're already following you around like you're their mother." It was true. The 6 hens they'd bought in town had taken to Evelyn immediately, clucking after her whenever she appeared in the yard. Rowan found it hilarious. "A cow is different than chickens," Evelyn protested. "Not that different. Both need food and water and shelter. Cow just gives you more in return." He looked at her over the half-finished deer. "Unless you don't want one. We don't have to." "No, I want one. I'm just worried I'll mess it up." "You won't." He said it with the same certainty he brought to weather predictions. "You haven't messed anything up yet." "I burned dinner last week." "The beans were a little crispy. That's not messing up. That's learning." He set the carving aside and pulled her closer on the bench they'd built together. "Stop expecting yourself to be perfect. Nobody is. Especially not up here." Evelyn leaned against his shoulder and watched the sky turn orange and purple. "Did Sarah cook well?" She felt him tense slightly. They didn't talk about his first wife often. The subject still carried too much old pain. But lately Rowan had been opening up more, sharing pieces of his past he'd kept locked away for decades. "Not really," he admitted. "She tried, but everything came out bland or burned or both. I ate it anyway because I loved her, and she was trying so hard to be something she wasn't built for." He was quiet for a moment. That's what killed her in the end, trying to survive in a place that was too harsh for someone that gentle. I'm not gentle. No, you're not. That's why you're still alive. He kissed the top of her head. Sarah would have liked that about you. She always wished she was tougher. They sat in comfortable silence while darkness gathered around the clearing and the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called, and Rowan identified it by sound alone, a great horned owl probably hunting rabbits near the creek. I'm late, Evelyn said quietly. Rowan went completely still. How late? 6 weeks? Maybe 7? I wasn't sure at first because everything's been so different here, but she turned to look at him. I think I'm pregnant. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, fear, hope, terror. He opened his mouth twice before any words came out. Are you sure? Not completely, but my body feels different, and I've been sick in the mornings. She put her hand over his where it rested on her knee. I know we didn't plan this. I know it's too soon, but nothing. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle, despite its size and roughness. If you're pregnant, then we're having a baby. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. Sure it is. We love each other. We have a home. We'll figure out the rest. But she could see the fear in his eyes, the memory of Sarah dying in childbirth while he was too far away to help. I'm not her, Evelyn said firmly. I'm stronger than I look, remember? You said so yourself. I know. I do. It's just... He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she felt his heart racing against her chest. I can't lose you. I can't go through that again. You won't. I'm not going anywhere. She pressed her face against his neck. We're both going to be fine. The baby, too. He held her like that until full dark settled over the mountain, and when they finally went inside, he made love to her with desperate tenderness, like she was made of glass that might shatter if he wasn't careful enough. The next morning, they rode to Black Ridge to see the doctor, an older man named Patterson who'd been practicing frontier medicine for 30 years. He examined Evelyn in his small clinic while Rowan paced outside like a caged animal. Well, Rowan demanded when Patterson finally emerged. She's pregnant. About 2 months along, if I'm reading the signs right. Patterson wiped his hands on a rag. Healthy, as far as I can tell. Strong constitution. But I'll want to see her monthly until the baby comes. That means coming down the mountain every month in the heat of summer, Rowan said. That means making sure your wife and child stay healthy. Patterson's expression softened. I know what happened with Sarah, Rowan. This isn't the same situation. Evelyn's built different, tougher, better prepared. She's got a real chance. A chance isn't good enough. It's all anyone gets. You know that better than most. Patterson clapped him on the shoulder. Take her home. Keep her fed and rested. Bring her back in a month. And for the love of everything, stop looking like someone died. You're going to be a father again. The words hit Rowan visibly. His throat worked and his eyes went distant, remembering a child he'd never met because the war had stolen that chance 20 years ago. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, looking tired but happy. Did he tell you? Yeah. Rowan's voice came out rough. He told me. They rode home in silence, but this time it wasn't the comfortable quiet they'd grown used to. Tension radiated from Rowan's shoulders and his jaw stayed clenched the entire way up the mountain. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down with exaggerated care, like she might break if he moved too quickly. I'm not fragile, Evelyn said. I know. Then stop treating me like I am. She caught his arm before he could walk away. Talk to me. Tell me what you're afraid of. He looked at her for a long moment, war raging behind his eyes. I'm afraid I'll fail you the way I failed Sarah. That I'll be gone when you need me most. That I'll come home and find... His voice broke. I can't do that again, Evelyn. I can't bury another wife and child. You won't have to. I'm not Sarah, and this isn't 20 years ago. She pulled him down until their foreheads touched. I'm here. I'm strong. And we're in this together, remember? Together, he repeated, like testing the word strength. Together. She kissed him softly. Now stop thinking the worst and help me figure out where we're going to put a cradle. Over the next weeks, Rowan threw himself into preparation with the same intensity he brought to everything. He started building a cradle from pine wood he'd been saving for something special, carving it with the same careful attention he gave his animal figures. He reinforced the cabin's chinking and checked the roof 3 times for weak spots. He hunted and trapped with renewed purpose, building up their food stores like he was preparing for a siege. Evelyn watched him work himself to exhaustion and said nothing because she understood. This was how Rowan processed fear, through action, through preparation, through the illusion of control over things that couldn't be controlled. She focused on her own preparations, sewing small clothes from fabric they bought in town, learning everything Patterson could teach her about childbirth on the frontier, talking to other women in Black Ridge who'd delivered babies in cabins and tents, and once, memorably, in a covered wagon during a river crossing. "The pain's bad," one woman told her bluntly, "worse than anything you've felt before, but it ends. And then you've got this little person who's half you and half him, and somehow it's worth it. What if something goes wrong? Then Patterson does what he can and you pray real hard." The woman squeezed her hand. "But you're young and strong. Better odds than most up here." June brought heat that felt shocking after the long winter. Evelyn's body changed in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Her belly swelling, her breasts tender, strange cravings for foods they didn't have access to. Rowan watched these changes with fascination and barely concealed fear, his hand drawn constantly to her stomach, as if checking that the baby was still there. "I felt it move today," Evelyn told him one evening. "Just a flutter, but definitely movement." His hand pressed against her belly immediately, hopeful and desperate. "I don't feel anything." "Give it time. It's still small." She covered his hand with hers. "But it's there, growing, real." That night she woke to find Rowan sitting up in bed, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking about names." He looked at her in the moonlight streaming through the window. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Samuel, after my brother who died in the war. And if it's a girl? I don't know. I never got that far with Sarah before." He stopped, jaw clenching. "Rose," Evelyn said quietly. "If it's a girl, we name her Rose. Your mother's name, right?" He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "She would have liked you too, would have said you were exactly the kind of woman I needed. Smart woman." She was. He lay back down and pulled Evelyn against him, his hand spreading protectively over her swelling belly. "Sleep. You need rest." But sleep didn't come easily for either of them anymore. The future felt too close and too uncertain, filled with possibilities both wonderful and terrible. July brought Evelyn's third visit to Patterson, who pronounced her and the baby healthy despite the challenges of mountain life. But on the ride home, trouble found them in the form of a stranger waiting on the trail. He sat his horse like someone accustomed to authority, wearing clothes too fine for frontier country. When he saw them approaching, his mouth curved into a smile that made Evelyn's blood run cold. She knew that smile, had seen variations of it in Philadelphia drawing rooms where men like Thomas Whitmore held court. "Mrs. Mercer," the man called out, "or should I say Miss Hart? I've been looking for you for quite some time." Rowan's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle. "Who are you?" "James Morrison. I'm an investigator employed by Mr. Thomas Whitmore of Philadelphia." Morrison's smile widened. "He's very interested in locating Miss Hart. Seems she stole some valuable items before fleeing the city." "That's a lie," Evelyn said, but her voice shook. "Is it?" "Mr. Whitmore has sworn statements from several witnesses. A warrant has been issued for your arrest." Morrison pulled papers from his coat. "I'm authorized to bring you back to Pennsylvania to face charges." "She's not going anywhere." Rowan's voice went flat and dangerous. "My wife hasn't stolen anything. Your employer is a liar trying to cover his own crimes." "Your wife?" Morrison's eyebrows rose. "How convenient. A hasty marriage in the wilderness to a man who advertises for brides. That will look quite suspicious to a judge, don't you think?" "I don't care how it looks. She's staying here." "I'm afraid that's not your decision." Morrison's hand moved to his own weapon. "The law is the law, even in Colorado territory." Rowan shifted his weight, and Evelyn knew he was calculating odds. 2 armed men on horseback, her pregnant and vulnerable, the trail too narrow for maneuvering. Morrison had chosen his ambush point well. "Rowan, don't," she whispered. "He'll kill you. And I'll kill him if he tries to take you." Rowan never looked away from Morrison. "Nobody touches my wife." "How romantic." Morrison's smile turned cruel. "But Mr. Whitmore anticipated resistance. I'm not alone. My associates are waiting in Black Ridge with the sheriff. If you kill me, they'll come up here with a posse and take her anyway, and you'll hang for murder." The trap closed around them with sickening precision. Thomas Whitmore had played this perfectly, sending someone who could hide behind law and authority, who could make Rowan look like the criminal for defending his wife. "How much?" Evelyn asked suddenly. Both men looked at her. "How much is Whitmore paying you?" she continued. "I'm sure it's a handsome fee, but I'm also sure you're not doing this out of civic duty. Name your price to leave us alone." Morrison actually laughed. "You think you can buy me off? With what? The few dollars a mountain trapper earns from pelts?" "With this." She pulled off the gold wedding band Rowan had bought her just last month, the ring he'd promised her back in January, presented during a quiet ceremony with just the preacher and the mountain as witnesses. "It's worth more than whatever Whitmore's paying you. Take it and tell him you couldn't find me." "Evelyn, no," Rowan started, but she ignored him. Morrison examined the ring with calculating eyes. "Not enough, but it's a start." He looked at Rowan. "What else have you got? Gold? Silver? More jewelry hidden away?" "We have nothing else," Rowan said through clenched teeth. "Pity. Then I suppose Miss Hart will have to come with me after all." Morrison started to dismount. The gunshot cracked through the air before anyone could react. Morrison jerked sideways, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. His horse reared and he fell, hitting the ground hard. Rowan had his rifle up instantly, but the second shot didn't come from him. Walsh appeared from the tree line, his own rifle smoking. "Saw you ride past my place with this bastard following. Figured he wasn't up to any good." Morrison clutched his bleeding shoulder, face twisted with pain and rage. "You shot me! That's assault! I'll have you arrested!" "Good luck with that. Sheriff's my brother-in-law." Walsh kept his rifle trained on Morrison. "And around here we don't take kindly to men who threaten pregnant women, especially when those threats are built on lies." "I have legal papers." "I don't care if you have papers signed by the president himself. This is Mrs. Mercer, respected member of our community, wife to one of the best men in these mountains." Walsh spat into the dirt near Morrison's head. "And you're some hired thug trying to drag her back to a man who hurt her. That's all I need to know." More riders appeared. Coleman and 3 other trappers, all armed, all looking at Morrison like he was something they'd scraped off their boots. "Heard there was trouble," Coleman said. "Thought we'd come see if the Mercers needed help." Rowan looked at the assembled men with something like wonder in his eyes. These rough mountain men who lived by their own code, who valued strength and honesty above law and society, they'd come to fight for his wife. Morrison struggled to his feet, still clutching his shoulder. "This isn't over. Whitmore won't stop until—" "Yeah, he will." Walsh gestured with his rifle. "Because you're going to ride back to wherever you came from and tell Mr. Whitmore that Evelyn Hart died crossing the mountains. Tragic accident. Very sad. End of story. And if I don't, then we bury you up here and tell the same story about you instead. Your choice." Walsh's expression made it clear which option he preferred. Morrison's face went pale. He looked at the circle of armed men, at Rowan's cold fury, at Evelyn's defiant stare. The mathematics of survival were clear even through his pain. "Fine," he gasped. "She's dead. I'll tell him she's dead." "Good man." Walsh nodded to Coleman. "Get him patched up and on his horse. Make sure he heads east and doesn't stop until he's out of the territory." They hauled Morrison away, his protests fading into the distance. When they were gone, Rowan turned to Walsh with gratitude written across his scarred face. "I owe you," he said simply. "You don't owe me anything. We look after our own up here." Walsh clapped him on the shoulder. "Besides, your wife stood up to Margaret's poison and survived a winter in the high cabin. That makes her tougher than half the men in Black Ridge. Nobody messes with tough." After Walsh left, Rowan and Evelyn sat on the trail in stunned silence. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind shaking hands and racing hearts. "It's really over," Evelyn whispered. "Whitmore thinks I'm dead. He'll stop looking. You're free." Rowan pulled her into his arms. "Actually free." She started crying then, ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. All the fear and running and looking over her shoulder, all the months of wondering when Whitmore's reach would find her, it poured out in racking tears against Rowan's chest. He held her through it, one hand in her hair and the other rubbing circles on her back, murmuring things that didn't need to be words to carry meaning. When she finally quieted, they sat together on the mountainside watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I should have killed him," Rowan said quietly. "I'm glad you didn't. That would have made you the criminal." She wiped her face on her sleeve. "Walsh did what needed doing. Now we can actually live without this hanging over us." "The baby?" Rowan's hand went to her stomach. "All that stress, the fear." "The baby's fine. I can feel it moving." She placed his hand where the flutter was strongest. "See? Tough, just like its parents." He almost smiled. "Stubborn is more accurate." They rode home slowly as darkness gathered, both processing the shift in their reality. Whitmore was gone. Morrison was gone. The past had finally released its grip and the future opened up clean and possible. That night, Rowan made love to her with reverent intensity, like he was claiming her all over again. Afterward, lying tangled in sweaty sheets, he traced the curve of her belly with gentle fingers. "I was terrified today," he admitted, "when I thought he might take you, that I might lose you and the baby both. But you didn't lose us. We're right here." She caught his hand and held it. "And we're staying here. This is our home, our mountain, our life." "Our family," he added quietly. "Our family." She felt the baby kick against his palm and saw wonder cross his face. "You felt that?" "Yeah," his voice rough with emotion. "Strong kick. Told you, stubborn." They lay there feeling the baby move, two people who'd found each other through desperation and built something real from the wreckage of their pasts. Outside, the mountain stood eternal and indifferent, but inside the cabin there was warmth and love and the promise of new life. August brought the final weeks of Evelyn's pregnancy, and with them a restlessness that drove her to clean things that didn't need cleaning and reorganize storage that was already perfectly organized. Rowan watched her nervous energy with amusement and growing anxiety of his own. "The cradle's ready," he told her one evening, running his hand over wood he'd sanded to impossible smoothness. "The cabin's ready. We've got enough food stored to feed an army. What else can I do? Stop looking at me like I'm going to break. I'm not. You are. Every time I stand up too fast or lift something heavier than a teacup, you panic." She moved to stand in front of him. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my women, not successfully." The words came out bitter and terrified. Evelyn took his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I am not Sarah. This is not then. We are here, now, and I am strong enough for this. You have to believe that." "I'm trying." "Then try harder, because I need you present and focused, not lost in 20-year-old nightmares." Her voice softened. "I'm scared too. But we face this together or not at all." He pulled her close, careful of her swollen belly, and she felt him shaking slightly. This mountain of a man who'd survived war and prison and decades of isolation, reduced to trembling at the thought of childbirth. "Together," he whispered against her hair. "I promise." The baby came on a night in late August when summer storms rolled through the high country with spectacular violence. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the cabin walls while Evelyn's water broke, and the first contraction started. Rowan went pale, but held steady, moving through the preparations they'd practiced a dozen times. Clean cloths, boiling water, the knife sterilized in flame. Everything Patterson had told them to have ready. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that rewrote Evelyn's understanding of suffering. She gripped Rowan's hands hard enough to leave bruises and screamed into the thunder and pushed until she thought her body might tear itself apart. Rowan stayed with her through all of it, talking her through contractions, wiping sweat from her face, telling her she was strong and brave and almost there, even when almost there felt like forever away. Finally, as dawn broke clear and golden after the storm, their son was born. He came out screaming his fury at the world, tiny fists waving and face red with indignation. Rowan caught him with shaking hands and stared like he'd been handed something holy and impossible. "A boy," he said hoarsely. "We have a son." Evelyn reached for the baby and Rowan placed him carefully on her chest. This tiny, perfect thing they'd made together. He was beautiful and wrinkled and covered in blood and vernix, and she'd never seen anything more miraculous. "Samuel," she whispered. Samuel Mercer. Rowan's face crumpled and tears rolled down into his beard. He pressed his forehead against hers while their son cried between them, and Evelyn felt the last of his fear finally break and wash away. They'd done it. They'd survived. They were a family. Outside, the mountain morning blazed with new light, and inside the cabin a different kind of light had kindled, small and fierce and full of impossible promise. The first weeks with Samuel were harder than either of them expected. The baby cried at all hours, refused to sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch, and seemed to have opinions about everything despite being barely a month old. Evelyn walked the cabin floor countless nights, while Rowan tried desperately to help, and mostly just got in the way. "Maybe he's hungry again," Rowan suggested for the third time in an hour. "I just fed him 20 minutes ago." Evelyn bounced Samuel against her shoulder, exhaustion making her voice sharp. "He can't possibly be hungry already." "Then what's wrong with him?" "I don't know. If I knew, I'd fix it." She immediately regretted the tone. "I'm sorry. I'm just so tired I can barely think straight." Rowan took the baby gently from her arms. "Go sleep. I'll figure this out." "You need sleep too. I can sleep when I'm dead. You just pushed a human being out of your body a month ago." He settled Samuel against his massive chest, and the baby's cries quieted slightly. "See? He just wanted his father." Samuel promptly spit up all over Rowan's shirt. "Or maybe not," Rowan muttered, but there was wonder in his voice even as he cleaned baby vomit off himself. He'd spent the last month staring at Samuel like he couldn't quite believe the child was real and wasn't going to disappear if he looked away. Evelyn collapsed onto the bed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She woke 3 hours later to find Rowan asleep in the rocking chair he'd built, Samuel tucked against his chest, and both of them snoring in almost perfect harmony. The sight made her chest ache with something too big for words. September brought the first hints of autumn, and with it, a visit from Patterson to check on both mother and baby. He examined them both with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many frontier births go wrong, but his expression relaxed as the checkup progressed. "You did good work here, Mercer," he told Rowan. "Mother and baby both healthy. Better than I expected, honestly." "Better than you expected?" Evelyn repeated. "First birth? High altitude? Middle of a thunderstorm with no help except your husband? I've seen that go sideways more often than not." Patterson packed his medical bag. "But you're strong, tougher than you look. And Rowan here didn't panic and do something stupid, which frankly surprised me." "I panicked plenty," Rowan admitted. "Just didn't let it show." "Smart man." Patterson looked at Samuel, who was currently gumming his own fist with intense concentration. "He's a good size, his strong lungs, obviously. You two planning on more?" Evelyn and Rowan exchanged glances. "Maybe," Evelyn said carefully, "if this one survives to adulthood without us losing our minds." Patterson laughed. "They get easier. Or maybe you just get used to the chaos. Hard to tell the difference." He headed for the door, then paused. "Heard Morrison left the territory. Told people in Denver that you died in a mountain accident. The story made it back east, apparently. Your Mr. Whitmore held a memorial service." The news should have brought relief, but instead Evelyn felt a strange hollowness. Somewhere in Philadelphia, people who'd once known her were mourning a woman who'd never existed, the scandalous thief Thomas Whitmore had invented. The real Evelyn Hart had died anyway, transformed into someone completely different on this mountain. "Good," she said finally. "Let him mourn. Let him think he won." After Patterson left, Rowan found her standing in the doorway watching Samuel sleep in his cradle. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm dead in Philadelphia. Evelyn Hart doesn't exist anymore." She looked at him. "I should feel relieved. I do feel relieved, but also strange. Like I cut off part of myself and I'm not sure what's left. What's left is the part that matters." He moved behind her, arms coming around her waist. "The part that's strong enough to survive up here. The part that's my wife and Samuel's mother. That's not less than who you were before. It's more." "How do you figure?" "Because that version of you in Philadelphia was built on other people's expectations. This version is built on what you actually are." He kissed her temple. "And what you are is someone who can split firewood and birth a baby during a thunderstorm and face down hired thugs without flinching. That's worth more than all the piano lessons and garden parties in the world." She leaned back against him, letting his strength support her weight. "When did you get so wise?" Around the time you showed up and forced me to think about things besides surviving. His hand spread over her still soft stomach. You changed everything, you know that? I was just existing before, going through motions. Now I'm actually living. Samuel chose that moment to wake up screaming, and the profound conversation ended in a flurry of diaper changes and feeding. But the words stayed with Evelyn through the chaos of infant care and the exhaustion that seemed to define her new existence. She'd spent her entire life trying to be what others expected, the proper Philadelphia lady, the accomplished pianist, the woman who knew her place and kept her head down. And where had it gotten her? Destroyed and running for her life. Here, on this brutal mountain, nobody expected her to be anything except competent and honest, and somehow that had freed her to become more than she'd ever been before. October painted the aspens gold and brought frost that killed the last of the garden. Evelyn harvested what vegetables had survived and began the process of canning and preserving for winter. Samuel watched from a basket near the fireplace, making his opinions known loudly whenever she stopped paying attention to him. "You're worse than the chickens," she told him, wiping preserve off her hands. "At least they don't scream when I'm not looking at them." Samuel grinned toothlessly and grabbed for her finger. "Don't smile at me like that. You're still in trouble for keeping us up all night." But she couldn't help smiling back as she picked him up. He was getting bigger, stronger, more aware of the world around him. Already he'd changed from the tiny red-faced creature born during the storm into something more recognizably human. Rowan appeared in the doorway with an armload of firewood. "Talking to the baby again? He's a better conversationalist than you most days." "Can't argue with that." He stacked the wood by the fireplace and crossed to where she stood with Samuel. "How's the preserving going?" "Almost done. We'll have enough vegetables to last until spring if we're careful." She looked at their winter stores with satisfaction. "Between the vegetables and the meat you've been smoking, we're in good shape. Better shape than last year." He tickled Samuel's belly, earning a delighted squeal. "Last year it was just me rationing supplies and hoping I'd calculated right. This year we've got enough to feed a family." The word still sounded strange and wonderful. Family. They were actually a family now, not just two people surviving together, but something more permanent and precious. That night, after Samuel finally fell asleep and they collapsed into bed, Evelyn asked the question that had been circling her mind for weeks. "What happens when he grows up?" Rowan turned to look at her in the darkness. "What do you mean?" "I mean there's no school up here, no other children, no real future except becoming a trapper like you." She kept her voice low so she wouldn't wake the baby. "Is that what we want for him? Total isolation?" "I turned out all right. You also spent your childhood before the war in settlements with other people. You had choices." She propped herself up on one elbow. "I don't want Samuel growing up thinking this cabin is the entire world." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe we spend winters up here but summers closer to town, or we figure out how to make enough money that we can afford to send him to a real school when he's older." She struggled to articulate the worry that had been growing alongside their son. "I just don't want him to be trapped by our choices." "He won't be trapped. We'll make sure he has options." Rowan's hand found hers in the dark. "But he's 3 months old, Evelyn. We've got time to figure this out." "I know, I just keep thinking about the future and all the things that could go wrong. That's called being a parent. From what I understand, the worry never actually stops." He pulled her closer. "But we'll handle it the same way we've handled everything else. Together." The word had become their anchor, their promise, their answer to every uncertainty. Together they'd survived winter and childbirth and hired thugs. Together they'd built a home from nothing but determination and rough timber. Together they'd created a life neither had believed possible. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way. November brought early snow, and with it a visitor Evelyn hadn't expected. Walsh rode up to the cabin with a woman in her 50s sitting behind him, both of them bundled against the cold. "Mrs. Mercer," Walsh called out, "brought someone to meet you." The woman climbed down stiffly and approached with the direct manner of someone used to being heard. "I'm Margaret's sister Eleanor. Came up from Denver to tell that idiot she needs to apologize for the poison she's been spreading." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "You came all the way up here for that?" "Came to Black Ridge to visit family and heard the whole story about how the mountain men ran off some hired thug who was trying to kidnap a pregnant woman." Eleanor's eyes were sharp but kind. Then I heard my sister had been making your life hell since you arrived. Figured it was past time someone set her straight. I appreciate that, but no buts. Margaret's always had a mean streak, but usually I can keep her in line from a distance. This time I had to come handle it in person. Eleanor looked past Evelyn toward the cabin. That's your boy I hear crying? Samuel had indeed started fussing, his wails carrying clearly through the open door. That's Samuel. He's got strong opinions about everything. Evelyn gestured toward the cabin. Would you like to come in? It's not much, but it's warm. Inside, Eleanor cooed over the baby while Walsh and Rowan discussed trap lines and weather predictions. She held Samuel with the confidence of someone who'd raised children of her own, and he quieted immediately under her practiced touch. He's beautiful, Eleanor said. Healthy, too. You did good work here. It was terrifying, Evelyn admitted. I kept thinking something would go wrong. First birth usually is terrifying, but you survived and so did he, which makes you tougher than most. Eleanor handed Samuel back. Listen, I talked to Margaret before coming up here. Told her she'd been acting like a jealous fool, and if she didn't stop spreading rumors, I'd make her life considerably more difficult. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Women need to look out for each other, especially up here where life's hard enough without adding cruelty to the mix. Eleanor's expression softened. Margaret's been bitter ever since her husband died 5 years back. Takes it out on anyone she thinks has it better than her, but that's not your problem to solve. After they left, Evelyn felt something shift. She'd spent so long expecting hostility from the town that actual kindness caught her off guard. But Eleanor was right. Women did need to look out for each other. And slowly, grudgingly, the women of Black Ridge had started accepting her as one of their own. December arrived with brutal cold and snow that buried the cabin up to the windows. They were completely isolated now, cut off from the valley below until spring thaw. But this time, isolation felt different. The cabin was warm and well-stocked. Samuel was growing bigger every day, and Evelyn had Rowan, not just as a survival partner, but as a husband she genuinely loved. On Christmas morning, she woke to find Rowan already up and building a fire. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle, temporarily content. Weak winter light filtered through the frost-covered windows. Merry Christmas, Rowan said quietly, careful not to wake the baby. Merry Christmas. She joined him by the fire, accepting the coffee he handed her. I didn't get you anything. We don't have money for gifts. Don't need gifts, he gestured around the cabin. I've got everything that matters right here. That's unusually sentimental for you. Fatherhood's making me soft. But he smiled when he said it. Actually, I did make you something. He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket, beautifully carved with intricate patterns. Inside was a simple wooden ring to match his own. She'd given him her gold band to sell to Morrison, and they'd both been ringless since. It's not gold, Rowan said, but it won't ever tarnish or need polishing, and I made it myself, so it means something. Evelyn slipped the ring on and felt tears prick her eyes. It's perfect. Yeah? He looked genuinely uncertain, this mountain man who could kill a bear with his bare hands, but worried whether a wooden ring was good enough. Better than perfect, because you made it for me. She kissed him softly. I love you. Love you too. He pulled her into his lap, careful of her still healing body. Can't believe I get to say that and actually mean it. Didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. About anyone? Or just about me specifically? Anyone. After Sarah died, I locked that part of myself away. Decided it was safer to just be alone. His arms tightened around her. Then you showed up, half frozen and terrified, and somehow you picked all the locks I'd built. Samuel woke up crying, and the moment ended, but the feeling stayed. That sense of completeness, of having found something precious in the last place either of them expected. January and February passed in a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes and brief stolen moments of sleep. Samuel was growing fast now, laughing at things only he could see, reaching for objects with increasing coordination. He had Rowan's gray eyes and Evelyn's stubborn chin, and watching him discover the world made all the sleepless nights worth it. He's going to be tall, Rowan observed one evening, watching Samuel kick vigorously in his basket. Look at those legs. He gets that from you. Everything about him is from you. Evelyn was mending clothes again, a never-ending task. Sometimes I look at him and can't find myself anywhere. He's got your determination. And your refusal to quit even when things are hard. Rowan picked up the baby and held him at arm's length, making Samuel shriek with laughter. Plus, he screams like you when he's angry. I do not scream. You absolutely scream. Remember when the chicken got into the cabin and knocked over the preserves? I heard words I didn't know you knew. Despite herself, Evelyn laughed. That chicken destroyed a week's worth of work. And you chased it around the cabin screaming threats that would make a soldier blush. He brought Samuel back to his chest. Point is, he's got pieces of both of us. That's what makes him ours. March brought the first thaw, and with it the ability to finally leave the cabin without risking death by blizzard. They made the journey to Black Ridge with Samuel bundled in furs, receiving congratulations from everyone they met. Even Margaret managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement, though she still couldn't quite meet Evelyn's eyes. Patterson examined Samuel and declared him the healthiest baby he'd seen in months. You two are doing something right up there. Whatever it is, keep doing it. Mostly we're just surviving, Evelyn said. That's all parenting is. Surviving and hoping you don't screw them up too badly. Patterson handed Samuel back. Bring him down again in a few months. I want to make sure he's hitting his milestones. On the ride home, Rowan was quieter than usual. What's wrong? Evelyn asked. Nothing's wrong. Just thinking. He guided the horse carefully around a patch of ice. About what you said back in October, about Samuel's future. We don't have to decide anything now. I know, but I've been thinking about it anyway. He was quiet for another moment. What if we did both? Kept the cabin for trap season, but rented a place in town during summer. Give Samuel a chance to be around other children, get some schooling when he's old enough. Evelyn twisted to look at him. You do that? Give up your isolation? It's not isolation anymore, it's just where we live. He shrugged. And yeah, I'd do it. For him, for you. Family's more important than staying in one place year-round. That would cost money we don't have. I'll make it work. Take more contracts, trap harder during season, maybe even guide hunters if I have to. His jaw set with determination. Point is, Samuel's going to have choices. He can be a mountain man if he wants, but it'll be because he chose it, not because we didn't give him any other options. She leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his coat. A year ago, this man had been a stranger advertising for a wife because he needed help surviving. Now he was planning to restructure his entire life so their son could have opportunities he'd never had himself. You're going to be a good father, she said quietly. I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do. April brought wildflowers and longer days, and Samuel's first genuine smile. Not the reflex grimaces of early infancy, but real joy directed at his parents. Rowan spent half an hour making faces trying to get the baby to smile again, and Evelyn watched them both with a contentment she'd never known existed. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not the polished perfection of Philadelphia society, where everyone smiled while slowly destroying each other, but this messy, complicated, beautiful reality where a reformed mountain hermit made ridiculous faces at a 6-month-old baby and his wife laughed until her stomach hurt. In May, they planted the garden together while Samuel watched from a blanket in the shade. Evelyn had learned which vegetables grew best at high altitude, and she worked the soil with confidence born from experience. Her hands were permanently rough now, calloused and scarred from a year of mountain life. She didn't miss her soft Philadelphia hands even a little. I think we should add another room to the cabin, Rowan said one evening while they sat outside watching the sunset. Samuel was asleep against his shoulder, finally worn out from a day of grabbing everything in reach. Why? This one's enough for now. For now, but if we have more children, he stopped, looking uncertain. I mean, if you want more, we haven't really talked about it. Evelyn considered. The birth had been brutal, but Samuel was worth it, and the idea of him growing up without siblings made her sad in ways she couldn't quite articulate. I want more, she said, maybe not right away, but eventually, yes. Relief crossed Rowan's face. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. He adjusted Samuel's position slightly. I was thinking we had a room on the south side, 2 beds for children eventually, maybe a real study area when they're old enough for schoolwork. You've really been planning this. I've got a lot of time to think while I'm running trap lines. He looked at the cabin like he was already seeing the expansion. Want to build something that lasts. Something Samuel can inherit someday if he wants it, or his children after him. You're thinking generations ahead now? Why not? We're building a legacy here, whether we meant to or not. His free hand found hers. This used to be just a place I survived. Now it's a home. Our home. Worth making it last. Summer arrived with warm days and cool nights perfect for sleeping. Samuel grew more interactive, babbling conversations in his own language and grabbing everything within reach. He was crawling now, which meant nothing was safe, and someone had to watch him constantly. He's fast, Rowan complained after Samuel made a break for the fireplace for the third time that morning. How is something that small so fast? He's motivated. Gets that from both of us. Evelyn scooped up the baby before he could grab hot coals. We're going to have to build a barrier or he's going to burn himself. They spent an afternoon constructing a wooden gate to keep Samuel away from the fireplace. He immediately viewed it as a challenge and tried to climb over it. Rowan caught him halfway up. Definitely gets the stubbornness from you, he told Evelyn. Pretty sure that's all you. I've seen you spend 4 hours fixing a trap that would have been easier to replace. That's not stubborn. That's practical. Keep telling yourself that. In August, they celebrated Samuel's first birthday with a small gathering in Black Ridge. The entire town turned out. Even Margaret, who'd slowly thawed over the past months into something approaching civility. Eleanor had made the trip from Denver again, and she brought gifts for Samuel along with news from the wider world. The Transcontinental Railroad's nearly finished, she told them over cake. Within a year, you'll be able to take a train all the way from coast to coast. Can't imagine wanting to, Rowan muttered, but Evelyn saw the interest in his eyes. The world was changing, even up here in the mountains. Maybe Samuel would grow up in a different frontier than they'd known, one where isolation was a choice rather than an inevitability. That night, riding back up to the cabin with Samuel asleep in her arms and Rowan solid behind her, Evelyn thought about everything that had changed in 2 years. She'd arrived here running from a man who'd tried to destroy her, desperate enough to marry a stranger just to survive. Now she was riding home to a cabin she'd helped build and maintain, with a son she loved more than breathing, married to a man who'd become her partner in every sense that mattered. Thomas Whitmore had meant to break her. Instead, he'd pushed her toward the only place she'd ever truly belonged. "What are you thinking about?" Rowan asked quietly. "How lucky I am." She leaned back against him. "How strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing." "You call marrying me the best thing?" "I call finding you the best thing. Marrying you was just the practical next step." She smiled in the darkness. "Though I'm pretty fond of you now, I suppose." "Just fond?" "Wildly, desperately fond. Better?" "Much better." He kissed the top of her head. "For what it's worth, advertising for a wife was the smartest thing I ever did, even if I had no idea what I was actually asking for." "What were you asking for?" "Help surviving. Someone to share the work." He was quiet for a moment. "What I got was a partner who's tougher than half the men I know, a son who's going to be stronger than both of us, a family I didn't think I deserved to have again." "You deserved it," Evelyn said firmly. "You just had to wait for the right person to show up." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from truly knowing someone. When they reached the cabin, Rowan took Samuel while Evelyn dismounted, and together they carried their sleeping son inside. This was their life now, not the one either had imagined, but better for being unexpected. Built on honesty instead of illusion, strengthened by shared struggle, made precious by the love they'd found in each other. The mountain had tested them with cold and isolation and brutal honesty about their own weaknesses, but it had also given them space to become something more than they'd been before. Evelyn was no longer the refined Philadelphia woman trying to please everyone while slowly losing herself. Rowan was no longer the isolated hermit who'd given up on human connection. They were partners, parents, survivors who'd learned that surviving was only the beginning. As autumn painted the aspens gold again, and they prepared for another winter, Evelyn stood in the garden harvesting the last vegetables and realized she was completely happy. Not the fragile happiness that depended on everything going right, but the deep contentment that came from knowing who you were and where you belonged. Samuel toddled over on unsteady legs and grabbed her skirt, babbling something that might have been mama or might have been nonsense. She picked him up and he laughed, pointing at clouds or birds or the mountain itself. "Yes," she told him, "that's home." And it was. Not despite its harshness, but because of it. Because here, on this brutal, beautiful mountain, she'd learned that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and healing and becoming someone new from the pieces. She'd come here running from destruction and found creation instead. She'd come here expecting to simply survive and learned how to actually live. And she'd come here alone and found a family. Rowan appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He saw her standing there with Samuel and smiled. The real smile he saved just for them, unguarded and genuine. "Everything all right?" he called. "Everything's perfect," she called back. And strange as it seemed, impossible as it would have sounded 2 years ago, it was absolutely true. The mountain stood eternal around them, indifferent to human joy or suffering. But the family living on its slope had carved out something the wilderness couldn't touch, a home built on trust, strengthened by love, made permanent by the simple choice to keep choosing each other every single day. That was the real story, Evelyn thought. Not the escape, or the survival, or even the falling in love, but the daily decision to build something that lasted, to plant gardens that would grow, to raise a child who would have choices, to look at a scarred mountain man and see not just a husband, but a partner worth everything she'd risked to find. The sun set behind the western peaks, painting the snow gold and orange and purple. Inside the cabin, the fire would be burning and dinner would be waiting, and later they'd put Samuel to bed before falling into their own. Tomorrow they'd wake and do it all again. The work and the wonder and the endless small moments that added up to a life. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was better. And as Evelyn carried her son toward the cabin where her husband waited, she understood something she'd spent years in Philadelphia searching for without ever finding. You didn't find happiness by avoiding hardship. You found it by facing hardship with people who refused to let you face it alone. You didn't build strength by protecting yourself from pain. You built it by surviving pain and discovering you were tougher than you'd believed. And you didn't create love by looking for perfection. You created it by choosing imperfect people and building something real from shared struggle and stubborn hope. That was the legacy they'd leave Samuel. Not wealth or status or social standing, but the knowledge that he came from people who'd refused to quit when everything said they should. Who'd chosen each other when logic suggested they shouldn't. Who'd built a home on a mountain that tried to kill them and called it paradise anyway. Because sometimes the best things in life came from the worst beginnings. Sometimes running away led you exactly where you needed to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, the stranger you married out of desperation turned out to be the love of your life after all.